Hi, I'm Brent, your City of Tucson Parks and Recreation Director. I'm also a landscape architect and an artist. So today I'm going to share with you kind of a really cool and different technique using watercolors. This is a natural sponge, and also we'll use a watercolor brush. But I'm just going to use a couple different colors and show you what I think is a real easy but quite impressive technique to watercolor painting a tree in the landscape. So here we go. Okay, all you aspiring landscape watercolorists, we're going to try to show you something really cool. It's a different technique, and I'd suggest if you can get a pad of watercolor paper. You can also get some inexpensive brushes and kind of a beginner's kit of watercolors. So anyway, I always like to encourage you to have fun with art. There's no wrong approach. In fact, sometimes my best mistakes end up being my best painting. So don't be bashful and just kind of jump right into it. But I'm going to show you a couple of techniques, and I'm going to apply them to what hopefully the final landscape will end up being. But it's an approach where we're going to actually use some masking tape, and we're going to kind of tape the shape of the trunk and some of the branches of a tree, and then we're going to paint all over top of it. When we pull the tape off, it will leave kind of like a white image of the trunk and the branches of the trees. So it's kind of hard to explain in words, so that's why I'm going to just show you how we approach that. But I have a side piece of paper that I always kind of sample the technique on the kind of the practice page before I put it on my final artwork. So here we go. Again, we're going to use a natural sponge. This is really important because the texture on the sponge, as you can see, has a lot of irregular, very natural edges. So when we dab the natural sponge into our watercolor paints, and then we dab it on our paper, and I'll show you here shortly, it has a really amazing natural look to it. So that's the technique we're going to show you. But to start, I mentioned that we're using, I just happen to have some blue tape that when I actually paint a room, I kind of do the edges with this. So I have it, but I just take little strips of the tape, and I'm going to just tear it into different shapes, and you'll see. Now here's where you have to kind of envision in your head what you want to create on the painting itself. So as I tear the tape into different shapes, my mind's already starting to assemble them into my landscape drawing. So I got some really fun edges already, and I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in. So this is going to be this shape's going to be part of the trunk of the tree. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it's going to start here. Now trees always grow out of the soil or out of the ground. So I'm going to be using some of these other shapes to start to suggest the hill or the silhouette of the landform itself. And again, these are just irregular, so you can have fun with it. You can make them about any type of shape or size that you want. Let's see here. I'm going to do this like this. Again, I probably have an advantage over you if you're just seeing this for the first time because I've done this a lot. And there's not any set pattern that you necessarily have to follow. So you're the great creator here, and you have great artistic license. I've just given you that artistic license in case your brother, sister, father, mother are wanting to know what's going on here. This really is supposed to be all about the tree, so I've got to get back to remembering what I want my silhouette of my branches and trunk to look like. It's actually looking like a Halloween tree, kind of a scary shape, but again, the thing to remember is there's no right or wrong way. I mean, as you can see, depending on how the tape ends up tearing, it suggests a lot of different possibilities. I'll just throw some of these extra scraps down here that will probably end up looking like a plant or some other. I try not to waste too much stuff. So I could go on and on, but I want to keep this kind of as a better learning approach. So we're going to kind of call it quits here shortly, and we'll get into the real fun stuff. The thing that you realize about most trees, if you look at them closely, they're the thickest when they come out of the ground, and as they grow towards the sun, it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. So I have to kind of keep that in mind. That's why you see a lot of the tape shapes kind of tapering to smaller shapes. And I think I'm just going to say that's probably it. Now just use the rest of this stuff, kind of throw it around here. Those will probably end up looking like rocks or something eventually. So anyway, so there's, if you can imagine then, everything that's taped in blue will end up being white, because I'm protecting the paper from the paints that I'm not going to add. So here's where the fun part occurs. So I'm going to use one of my natural sponges here and just dab it in a little water. And the thing about watercolors is you always go from lightest to darkest. So I'm going to actually use some yellow real quickly. And again, I'm going to kind of try it out over here on my side paper. We're going to assume that the sunlight's coming in from the top left of our watercolor paper and hitting the tree on its left side. So I'm using bright yellow because if green foliage is hit by sunlight, it'll probably look lighter green. So on this side of the tree, I'm going to add all of our bright yellow. And again, when you think about the colors as they go from light to shade to shadow, it'll be bright to medium to darker on the back side in general. You also want to make sure that you take some of your colors and you add it down onto your ground plane too. So I'm going to add some of these down on the ground. Those might end up being yellow wildflowers, but up on the tree, it's going to be some of the bright colored leaves. And again, we have to remember we want to put colors over top of the blue tape, because that's going to turn into the white shape of the trunk of the tree itself. So now I'm going to slowly go into some darker greens. And again, that's what our practice is all about, to see what colors might indicate. So really knowing that the darker side is going to be on the right or the back side of the tree, we're going to put most of that over here on this side. And you can see how beautiful that is just with this natural sponge. When it takes paint and puts it on watercolor paper, it looks very much like foliage on a tree. So if you can see, I'm kind of blending my yellow and my green, so as I move towards the bright side, it's a little lighter green, and that's what makes it look real three-dimensional. But again, I want to go back in and make sure I've got enough paint around the edges of the blue tape, because that's what's going to end up being white when we get done. And again, we want to make sure that our hill or our landscape has some of the same. And by tapping the sponge on the paper and then dragging it, you have a whole new technique. So you can see how that starts to take on a whole different look. And I'll sweep it around a little so it's there's some hills and mountains in the background. Okay, so I'm going to add a little more dark green on the back side. Back here, I think it wants to be darker again. Sun's coming from the left side or up above, so we're going to have a lot of dark, so it looks three-dimensional over in that side. So there's how it's looking so far. Now, this particular tree, we're going to say it's ending up starting to become more late summer and autumn. And you know what happens to tree colored leaves in the autumn, they start to take on a kind of a golden look. So just to give it more interest visually, I'm going to throw in some gold tones here and there. Again, just to make it look a little more interesting. But again, I'm trying to really intensify the paint around the blue shape, so when I peel that off, it's going to look, it will reveal the branching of the tree. And again, I'm going to bring some of that gold down onto the earth plane because, as you know, we have a little sandy environment here in the desert. So we'll add some of that gold color down into our landscape there. Kind of unify our drawing or our painting with color. The last thing I'm going to do is with a watercolor brush, so it's going to have a different technique. Dab it in water, and we're going to just pull up a little blue, because fortunately here in Tucson we're blessed with lots of beautiful blue skies. So I'm just going to again suggest, you know, more of a cloudy sky. And again, there's no right or wrong approach to this, but I think adding some blue up above will be important. And again, the more you experiment and the more you dabble with your watercolors, you'll see that there's lots of neat techniques. One thing also is kind of cool is if you throw a lot of paint in an area and then you tip it away and let gravity move the paint away, it adds kind of a neat effect too that you can build upon. So anyway, I'm just going to try to bring some sky from the sides through so it comes out on the other side of our tree. Again, it just makes it look a little more natural. And then even though you don't see a lot of blue down in our landscape, I try to unify it. So I'll be adding some blues down here somewhere. All right, so here's the fun part. We're going to go in now and gently remove, if I can, some of our tape. And you want to take it kind of easy because, as you can see, the paint is still wet. A lot of watercolor artists will have their assistant is actually a hairdryer, so they can actually blow dry the paper if that's the issue. But really just letting it naturally dry works too. So if you ever go on a hike, like out at Sabino Canyon, along the washes or the streams, you'll see some of the bigger trees that are usually either a sycamore or a cottonwood. They have a whiter bark, and that's kind of what we're suggesting by masking off some of our landscape with tape, painting over it. And then when you reveal it back, it adds kind of that silhouette or that shape of the tree in a fun way. So again, some of these shapes are kind of odd. I'll probably turn these little shapes into stones or rocks in the landscape once I get them all peeled off. But again, you're the artist. You can portray and create whatever kind of images with these fun techniques. And hopefully, you know, after you watch this and you practice a lot more, you'll become very proficient, and you'll probably develop your own techniques to come across with some really fun stuff. Okay, so again, it's kind of wet, but you can kind of see what I meant about that. So then you go back in with your sponge and you pick up some of your paints that are still remaining, and you just go over top of some of that. I like to soften the points a little, but it makes it look like the foliage actually is out in front of the tree in many areas. Kind of out of paint there, but I think you get the idea. And then down in the landscape here, I'll probably come in with more of the like wildflower shapes and just kind of dab it around, soften it up a little. You can go back in with your brush and maybe pick up some of those earth tones and actually make some of these shapes look more like stones. It's an idea. And if again the sun's coming in from the left, if you want to take one of your colors and kind of shade the backside of the trunk a little, it'll make it look more three-dimensional. Again, the more you play around with this, you'll come up with your own techniques, but in simple terms, that's kind of a real quick, kind of down and dirty way to create a fun landscape using a natural sponge and some tape. So have fun.